Well, I'm going to speak on behalf of several people up here. First of all, Oscar Scrimin, who has not been able to come with us today, but he's written something that I'm going to read to you all. He's part of the UCLA faculty here for many years, and many of you may know him. So these are his words. As we celebrate the life of Professor Ralph Sonnenschein, we should reflect on what he meant for our institution and for the students and colleagues that interacted with him. Ralph was one of the founding members of our medical school. He arrived in 1951 from Chicago, where he had been faculty in physiology department of Northwestern University Medical School, where Professor Ivy was chair. One of the giants of the time, who left a permanent imprint on the field of gastrointestinal physiology. Ralph helped design the curriculum of the UCLA School of Medicine, and in particular the teaching of physiology, a discipline he honored throughout his academic life. His initial research interest was in pain, and he published back in 1948 an illuminating paper on the mechanism of nitrous oxide anesthesia, an agent still in use today. His interest moved then to the causes of pain in the skin, an organ that fascinated him because he could actually see the vascular changes that accompanied pain. A few years ago, I became interested in the skin circulation in relation to the clinical detection of peripheral vascular disease and went to ask Ralph for advice. He presented me with his publications from that era, and it was an illuminating experience. He'd done so much fundamental work on the local control of skin circulation and pain that involves complex interactions between the autonomic nervous system and the local neural networks. It was even more impressive because he didn't have the tools that exist today to measure skin blood flow, and yet he discovered many aspects of that complex machinery. But Ralph was not restricted to one field of research. In the 50s, there was a great interest in the phenomenon of convulsions experienced by divers when they were exposed to ambient pressures exceeding a few atmospheres. Ralph and his colleagues in the Office of Naval Research set out to study this phenomenon in animals inside pressure chambers, for which they had to develop tissue electrodes to sense the pH, oxygen tension, and electrical activity of the brain. Their studies helped pioneer this field that eventually resulted in better gas mixtures to avoid the ominous incident of convulsions in divers. During a leave of absence in Sweden at Björn Folkov's laboratory, Ralph became acquainted with natural divers, ducks, and compared the blood flow through their muscles during simulated dives in the laboratory with cats that, like humans, are not naturally suited for that activity. I'm going to put a parenthesis in here because I remembered it was so cool when he brought home this little plastic turtle and said, "This is my next experiment." I said, "Wow, Dad, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to train these baby ducks when they hatch out of the eggs to think that this is their mom. And then I'm going to make this plastic turtle dive down whenever I wanted to and come back up whenever I wanted to, and the baby ducks will follow." And that's what he did. And so that he was able to have these ducks dive down when he commanded them to, basically. I really thought that was cool. So from then on, muscle blood flow was one of his main interests. He touched on many other aspects of physiology with a common thread of integrative mechanisms in the control of the peripheral circulation and cardiovascular reflexes. He was one of the few remaining physiologists who could understand the body as a whole. I met Ralph when I landed with my family in Los Angeles in 1976. We were escaping deplorable human rights conditions in Argentina at the dawn of a repressive dictatorial regime that took the lives of thousands of citizens and forced the exile of many more that believed in democracy, social justice, and academic freedom. Through common friends, I found Eduardo Rubinstein, also a long-term physiology faculty here, and he introduced me to Ralph. They gave me my first job in this country. It was the beginning of a wonderful period in which the three of us shared not only science, but also values and friendship. Ralph helped me to connect with this new world, to understand the scientific and academic environment, and to appreciate the opportunities available. Not only did he understand our predicament of exiles that had lost jobs and left behind home and friends, He also sought to boost my self-esteem by becoming interested in my modest scientific contributions, to the point that he and Eduardo allowed me to continue my own work here. Writing a paper with Ralph was quite an experience. Word processors had not been invented yet. And I'll note that maybe he would never have used them as we saw that. Okay. Cutting and pasting implied scissors and scotch tape, then a trip to the secretary's desk who would faithfully put a new version together only to go through more cutting and pasting. In the middle of those sessions, a package with medals coming from some remote part of the world will arrive, and we had to stop and discover the contents that invariably brought great joy to Ralph and some education for me, because he would tell me the stories of the subjects in the medals, complete with life events and physiological discoveries. He knew not only those personalities immortalized in bronze, but a good deal of the physiologists alive at the time. When we first met, and I told him of the time I'd spent in Scotland in Lawrence Malcolm's lab, he immediately quipped that he had visited the lab, had met most of the people there, and knew what they were working on. Same with several labs I had visited in London. Where did that come from? I then learned that he had spent time in England visiting labs and getting acquainted with all the prominent physiologists in Great Britain and the continent on a mission of the Office of Naval Research. Thus, he acquired a broad knowledge of the cutting-edge physiological research of the time and forged relations with a number of physiologists that he maintained, with mutual benefits for decades. He was very involved with teaching, both graduate and undergraduate. He loved to guide small group discussions around an experiment in the student lab. There he would distill his vast experience to a level understandable by medical students, with links to practical clinical scenarios. In spite of not being a practicing physician, he never lost contact with medicine. He attended ground rounds regularly and kept abreast of clinical advances. Ralph Sonnenschein was all of the above, a consummate physiologist, a historian, a teacher, and fundamentally a very fair, generous person that helped and loved others. We will miss him. I miss him. I always had the feeling that he was caring for me. I know of many instances in which he did, and I am sure there were many others that I never knew about. The lessons I learned from him still guide me. His lack of hubris and his tolerance and passion still inspire me, and I'm sure the same feelings exist in the hearts of many human beings whose lives he's touched. Thank you, Oscar. Now, I have a copy of a letter, a memo, to Ralph Sonnenschein from the physiology staff. And this was found by John Field and in boxes of material saved from his mother's home. So this comes from him and his family. Advice to an expectant father. By the way, this is dated, I believe, 1952. Okay? Advice to an expectant father. When for the first time a young man is facing problems new, it well behooves his colleagues to see what they can do. By way of giving sage advice and telling him some facts of life, so he won't be too ignorant of how a baby acts. 1952. I was born in 1953. Jack says, "First, Ralph, consider sex. I recommend the male. I've tested this in triplicate and I never had it fail." But Victor says, I think this is Victor Hall, some of you may know. But Victor says, "I've run controls and find girls just as good. In fact, if you can choose a girl for first, I think you should." Bill's data check. "What's more," he adds, "I think that you will find basic satisfaction to be derived from either kind." Alan says, "As to procurement, I found a quicker way." And Bob Smith says, "How do you do it, kid, is what I say." Bob Livingston, just puzzled, diffidently quote, "Are babe and baby synonyms? How come Ralph gets both?" Well, Ralph and Pat there's just one fundamental thing to bear in mind. Babies are people, independent little people you may find. But come to us for helpful hints if e'er baffles you. We'll gladly tell how easily our young outwit us too. So that is Physiology Department's blessings to me.